My name is Ethan Walker, and this is the story of how a tech burnout turned unlikely rancher ended up challenging and dismantling a corrupt HOA empire in the heart of Montana. 6 months ago, I was living in downtown Seattle, deep in the tech world. I was 35 years old, pulling in a six-figure salary, working late hours writing lines of code, attending networking mixers, and living the so-called urban dream. Everything was moving fast, almost too fast to notice how fragile it all was until the tech market crash wiped it away like a tide pulling out to sea. One day I had a job. The next, the CEO's hollow-eyed announcement came, and we were done. No severance, no grace period, just good luck. For 2 weeks, I scoured every tech board, sent out resumes by the dozens, attended interviews where the tension was so thick you could taste it, and nothing. Every conversation ended with a polite shake of the head. Seattle's cost of living loomed like a storm cloud, and despair crept closer each day. That was when I got the call from my grandfather's attorney. Walter Walker, my grandfather, had passed away at 89 years old, and in his will, he left me his 100-acre ranch in Lakeside, Montana. As a kid, I'd spent summers there, fishing, riding horses, listening to his stories about our family history on that land stretching back to the 1950s. Life had pulled me away, and the distance had grown. But hearing that he was gone, it broke something inside me. I packed up my small apartment, loaded what little I had left into my aging truck, and made the 15-hour drive to Montana. The farther I got from the city, the more memories came flooding back. Grandpa teaching me to mend fences, the stubborn mule he loved named Jasper, the big sky stretching out forever. But when I arrived at the ranch, a shock awaited me. The house was as I remembered, small, sturdy, modest. His old coffee cup still sat in the sink, a book lay open in the worn recliner by the window. It was as if he had just stepped out for a moment. The ache in my chest tightened. Yet beyond the house, the landscape was different. Where there had once been fields, rolling meadows, and untouched woods, now stood rows of luxury mansions, cookie-cutter homes with manicured lawns, stone facades, and the hollow perfection of a gated community. It was called Lakeside Estates. Confused and angry, I dug through Grandpa's paperwork trying to make sense of it. That's when the knock came. Standing at the door was an older woman, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, gripping a white envelope. "I'm Ruth Porter," she introduced herself, a neighbor who had known my grandfather for 30 years. He was a good man, stood his ground. That's why they hounded him. I assumed the envelope was a condolence card. Ruth urged me to open it. Inside was a letter from the Lakeside Estates HOA demanding $250,000 in fines for alleged violations, property neglect, unauthorized agriculture, improper fencing, and more invented nonsense, including $85,000 in legal fees. They gave 30 days to pay or face a lien. "This is insane," I said aloud. "Welcome to the new Lakeside," Ruth said grimly. "Started about 5 years ago. The HOA crept in, built up without permission, kept expanding. Your granddad refused to sell, so they made up rules to bleed and dry. But the ranch isn't even inside their development," I protested. Ruth only nodded toward the study. Walter kept a folder. Proof. For hours, I searched until I found it. An old manila folder stuffed with a 1952 survey, modern satellite images, photos showing boundary markers displaced, and Walter's handwritten notes. Sure enough, the new HOA survey had stolen nearly 10 acres of our land now occupied by 15 houses and half of the HOA's own clubhouse. That night, I barely slept, pacing the creaking floors, weighing my choices. Sell? Fight? Walter's voice echoed in my memory. Some things are worth defending. The next morning, Ruth accompanied me to the county records office. It was a squat brick building smelling of mildew and old paper. Behind the counter was Ellen Brooks, a clerk who had known Walter for years. "You've got a case," she whispered after glancing at the documents. They pulled a fast one. She pointed to the original survey filed in 1952. Our land stretched 300 yards farther into what was now Lakeside Estates. "The new survey?" "A carefully trimmed version. You'll need a neutral surveyor," Ellen advised. "Jake Whitman. He's honest." Jake, a rugged 60-year-old with a permanent sunburn and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, agreed to take the job. We spent the entire next day walking the property line, GPS equipment slung over his shoulder. At the end, Jake nodded solemnly. "They built right over your land," he confirmed. "Got it notarized, too. Solid as a rock." He also recommended a lawyer in Billings, his brother-in-law, Marcus Reed, specializing in property disputes. Armed with Jake's report, I walked straight into the HOA office, a gleaming log cabin monstrosity complete with a stone fireplace and a waterfall in the lobby. The receptionist, polished and dismissive, tried to stall me, but I pushed through into Marjorie Lane's office. Marjorie was the HOA president, mid-40s, sharp suit, cold blue eyes, a bob haircut so precise it looked weaponized. She didn't bother standing. "A pleasure, Mr. Walker," she said with the barest hint of a smirk. "I hope you'll be more reasonable than Walter was." I slid Jake's report and the old survey across her desk. "You build on my land," I said flatly. Marjorie didn't flinch. She glanced at the papers, then tossed them aside with a chuckle. "An outdated survey. Our approvals are county certified. Fully legitimate. By firms you paid off?" I shot back. Her smile tightened. "You're out of your depth. Pay the fines, sign over the disputed land, and this all goes away. And if I don't? Then the HOA liens your ranch. We auction it off. Standard procedure." I left seething but more determined than ever. That evening, Ruth warned me. Marjorie had deep ties to county officials, inspectors, even judges. "If you're gonna win," she said, "you need sunlight. You need the truth on blast." Marcus, the lawyer, was cautious. "They'll drag it out. Expensive. Stressful. But building on your land? That's fraud. Fight smart." The HOA had an open meeting 2 weeks later. I decided to crash it. The Lakeside Estates clubhouse, built partially on my property, was packed. Wealth dripped from every chandelier, every designer handbag, every pair of polished loafers. Marjorie sat at the head of the table like a queen overseeing her court. When the meeting opened for community concerns, I stood up. "My name is Ethan Walker. My grandfather owned this land. Half this clubhouse stands on it illegally." A ripple of murmurs spread. Marjorie, smooth as ever, waved me off. "Mr. Walker is confused. His family has a long history of—" I slammed Jake's notarized report onto the podium. "This isn't confusion. It's theft." An environmental lawyer named Emily Sloan, a resident, perked up. She demanded to see the documents. Suddenly, Marjorie's control over the room cracked. Residents started whispering. Doubts grew. Afterward, Emily pulled me aside. "I can help," she said. "But you need allies inside Lakeside, too." Over coffee the next morning, Emily and I hatched a plan. Build a coalition, uncover every rotten thing Marjorie had buried. Through Emily, I met Carlos Reyes, a former HOA grounds manager who quit after seeing boundary markers mysteriously move overnight. His cousin worked in county records and found doctored files showing Marjorie had altered old property lines. Carlos, Ruth, Emily, even the local sheriff, Tom Harrison, an old fishing buddy of Walter's, started feeding me tips. Tom, careful to stay neutral, quietly encouraged me to keep digging. Meanwhile, the HOA tripled my fines to $300,000 and filed a nuisance complaint when I posted private property signs around my land. Marjorie held a press conference painting me as a greedy troublemaker trying to destroy progress. The local paper, in her pocket, refused to publish my side. So, I created a Facebook page, The Truth About Lakeside. I posted every piece of evidence. Residents started sharing it. Complaints trickled in. Private grievances boiled over. When a journalist from Helena, Sarah Kim, caught wind of the story, she published a brutal expose, Paradise Stolen. It went viral. Suddenly, the HOA board members panicked. Some turned on Marjorie. Residents demanded an audit. Protest signs sprouted like weeds. Marjorie offered me $1 million to walk away. I refused. She offered $2 million. I still refused. That's when I found Walter's ace in the hole, a dusty, signed 1975 contract tucked in the ranch's attic, proving the water rights Marjorie's development depended on were still tied to our original bounda. Rise. She had built an entire empire on a stolen foundation, and she knew it. I confronted her in her office. She laughed coldly. "I've crushed bigger men than you," she sneered. Thanks to Montana's one-party consent law, I recorded everything. At the next community meeting, held under a giant tent on my ranch because the clubhouse was technically my property, we played her confession for a stunned crowd of 100 residents. Marjorie was booed, shouted down, and ultimately voted out. Emily was elected HOA president. The fake fines were canceled. The HOA leased the land from me fairly. Marjorie sold her holdings at a loss and disappeared. Today, the ranch is thriving again. I transformed it into the Walker Agricultural Education Center, offering workshops, farming classes, and horseback riding lessons. We teach sustainability, conservation, and the history of the land my grandfather loved so much. At the ranch entrance, a hand-carved sign reads, "Never underestimate a rancher with an old map and a long memory." Just like Walter always said,